So thank you everyone for coming. Welcome to now the second edition of Question Time. I'm joined here on the panel by James Davenport, Hebron and Medlock Professor of Information Technology at Bath University, by Johnny Ray Evans, Head of Product Innovation at Big Lottery Fund, by Melinda Clayman, a UX researcher at Google, by Dave Kelly, founder of the Bath Digital Festival and Managing Director at Storm, and by James Hobbs, owner, experienced development manager at Dyson. We have 4 questions to get through today. While we're discussing, please just indicate to me or put your hand up if you want to interject and you have a question to ask the panel, and I will come around to you. And we'll start off with our first question from Mia Martell-Hayes.
As more and more jobs are lost to artificial intelligence, robots, and automation, should it become the tech company's responsibility to directly support the costs of a universal basic income, and how would that work?
So, Johnny, let's come to you first.
Okay, no pressure to be the first one. Short answer, no. I don't think. I think it's there's a lot more complexity to that question. I think an economics expert would be the right person to answer it. I think a danger that we have in the tech scene is we often want to go and solve a problem. Like, I'm a tech bro, I'll go solve homelessness and know nothing about homelessness. In that spirit, though, I'll still try and answer it. I think what the tech companies need to focus on is the responsibility for the work that they do. And it may well be that you make an interesting piece of tech that leads to significant displacement and it causes havoc in the jobs market. And of course, they have some kind of responsibility for the impact that that has. But I think I always worry about removing or eroding government's role in caring for people. I think the natural thing that would happen, I think universal basic income is going to happen at some point. I think we'll have to. There's not enough stuff for everybody on the planet. There's not enough food. We're running out of resources which are finite. That will happen or we'll all die. Maybe, which is best of those? I don't know. I'm really fun. I think that will happen. I think, though, that it's natural, those organisations, whether it's tax, which will help fund things like universal basic income, but I think the government would I would hope, have a larger role in how that system works, rather than just big tech.
Okay, thanks. Dave, do you agree with that?
So there's 2 questions in that one. First of all, really, will AI automation lead to a mass loss of jobs? And secondly, is universal basic income a route out of it? In reverse order, no, I'm not at all sold on universal basic income. It's only been tried twice in the history of modern economics, once late 60s, early 70s in the US. There was a 17% drop in work effort amongst men and a 7% drop amongst women. Later tried in Canada, where they had a vast, that was 74 to 79, vast drop-off in youth entering into the workplace because they thought, well, there's not as much impetus to do so. So there might be something, but I don't think... there's also a trial going on right now in Sweden, Switzerland? Finland, yes. Knew it was somewhere around there. Data not really available from that yet, so, TBC. But I'm not sure that universal basic income is the right way around it. And I'd also kind of take a quick look back at when you look at other times that automation's come into play. So, the Industrial Revolution actually led to, over the course of 10 years subsequent, a greater workforce being employed and a vastly increased standard of living. So I think there's still also a question mark around whether or not the path we're on is going to vastly reduce the number of jobs. And so I could be wrong, nor would I stake my professional reputation on the fact that it won't happen. But if the past's anything to go by, we will probably still find, especially if you look at the creative sectors, so anything where there is creativity involved or heavy levels of creativity, that usually is a sector that seems a boom when basic jobs are eroded, because that is a place which is relatively well protected from automation and AI. So I'm not convinced.
So James Davenport, do you believe that jobs will be lost to automation, and if so, whose responsibility is it to?
Okay, so that's very interesting. So almost certainly some jobs will be lost to automation. I mean, the motor car completely displaced the people whose job it was to sweep up horse dung in London. But that didn't lead to unemployment. Just made people do different jobs. So I think we need to distinguish between the macro and the micro scale here. It is possible, totally open I think, that increased automation will lead to a net decrease in employment, which I think what that question really means. If that does so, to a point where large numbers of people are capable of working but not working and therefore fall through the nets in the current safety system, then something will have to be done about the safety system, if that happens. And whether the right thing for that is universal basic income or something else, I don't know. I'm not an economist or social scientist. However, it's fairly clear we'll need funding, but that is, as it were, a government's responsibility and right to decide how that funding is collected and done. If I were, which I'm not, thank God, Chancellor Exchequer, I would certainly look at the rich, profitable firms, which are probably the tech firms, and see where to get the money from. But I don't think that the question includes the word directly. And that's why I have a real problem with that question. Yes, if there are lots of people ultimately out of work because of increased productivity due to AI, then that increased productivity has in some sense to fund those people's right to eat and so on. But whether how one does that quotes directly, I don't see. I just don't see. For starter, what's the definition of a tech firm? How do you actually write a legally binding definition in terms of how much money you have to pay and so on? I mean, it's relatively clear that Amazon is a tech firm. It's relatively clear that Klarna and Small is not a tech firm. So where do you put Deliveroo? Where do you put all sorts of other things? There is a spectrum. There isn't you're a tech firm, therefore you must pay more. There's no, I mean, everyone uses some tech. Some people use more in different ways than others. So it certainly won't be the tech firms must pay. I mean, that sounds like a nice slogan, but it's just more complicated than that. But I do believe if, case not proven at all, there is net unemployment, then it is society's job and the government's job to do something about that. And if that involves raising revenue from the more profitable, so be it. That would be the obvious way to do it. But I don't believe that should be, you are a tech firm, therefore you must support these number of people. I don't believe that would work.
And Melinda, if there is a drop in employment due to automation and increases in AI and technology, where do you think the revenues to support either the basic income, as the questioner suggests, or the welfare state in general should come from?
I mean, ideally, I think it should come from the government, but there are a lot of irresponsible and greedy governments out there that don't care to support people at a universal basic income. So then it becomes the responsibility of companies or philanthropists or, you know, or we just get faced with horrible poverty. And having moved to the UK a few years ago from Silicon Valley and the Bay Area, I can tell you that it is, the whole area is completely taken over with overpaid 25-year-old tech bros. And there's no longer, it's not the like artsy, weird, you know, you can be poor and live there kind of a place it was when I originally moved there, you know, 15 years prior. So there's all these homeless camps now, like in San Francisco, in one of the most beautiful cities in the world, and there are people living in tents. So obviously this is a problem. I work at Google, obviously I'm part of the problem, but I think that a universal basic income would be a solution, and I don't think, I hope it would come from a government. I don't know if it's going to. I don't know how we're going to get out of this problem.
James, do you have a solution?
I don't think any one person has a solution. I think it's a problem you can only solve with lots of different people. But to answer the question, I don't think blame, if you like, should be apportioned to tech companies for the reasons James pointed out. It's very hard to define what that is. Companies are quite adept at pivoting to make themselves not fit that definition. If you look at how much tax some of them don't pay, for example. So I think that would be hard to enforce. But there is a precedent for some tech companies getting involved with experimentation when it comes to universal basic income. So there's a famous startup accelerator in the US called Y Combinator who are funding a 5-year trial of, you probably know those guys, who are funding a 5-year universal basic income trial. I think the right thing to do is to experiment on a small scale and measure, most importantly, because as Dave mentioned, there have been a kind of scattershot trials of this kind of concept around the world, but it needs to be properly measured. What does good look like? We need to define that and what we're actually trying to solve here. Are we trying to give people jobs, or are we trying to make sure that they've got a roof over their heads and they can feed themselves and they're not wondering where their next meal is going to come from, etc. So I think the right thing to do is to experiment, to measure, and to iterate on that to come to the right conclusion as to what we should do.
Johnny, do you feel that there is any way to identify how taxation should change as jobs decrease?
Paying tax, full stop, would be a really good step. Yeah, no, I'm not sure. And answer that. I think it's such a complex problem as well. So defining what is a tech company in the context of tech is quite interesting in and of itself. How do you do that? But also, let's say you make something that's quite interesting, maybe something in automation or AI, and you enable anybody to use that. And your use of that actually doesn't cause any harm, doesn't displace any jobs, doesn't cause havoc, but somebody else, actually their implementation of it. Who of those two would be responsible? Which of those two would you tax? It's such a challenging situation. How should that taxation work? I have absolutely no idea. But I think is taxation the only answer as well? So to what extent should we say organisations and tech firms should be responsible for helping reskill and retrain people where you've maybe caused a bit of issues in the job market? There is no use, it doesn't exist now. Whether universal basic income will work or not, the fact is it doesn't exist now. But there may be examples where people are already losing their jobs because of advancement in tech. How many times do we expect people to have to retrain? What kind of support is there for people to retrain? I saw a good, and also speaking with Bex, who I travelled down to today, in that how actually, if you ignore the hype of the press, we're actually terrible at this stuff. There are not many examples of automation being really, really great. And when we passed through the train station in Bath today to get in, so you put your ticket in the machine and it pops up. We live in a small town, and it caused havoc on a small town, the idea that someone's going to put in these barriers. You're going to remove the train staff, we're all going to have to use these barriers, and nobody can use the barriers. They've had to employ extra people to help you when the barriers break. But in Bath, it was really special, where you got to it, and someone was stood next to it, and I had to hand her the ticket, and she would put it in for me. Like, robots aren't taking our jobs yet, but we do need to think about, actually, if it's not about tax, what else can organisations do to actually help support people and care for them?
So is there a consensus on the panel then that there isn't going to be a net drop in employment due to automation?
I'd say that there probably will be a drop, at least a short-term one, but I think it's going to be very difficult to quantify what that is. And what Johnny said, thinking about this problem now is a good thing rather than waiting until something does happen.
So I disagree. I don't think there'll be a drop. Never in history as advancements have happened. You might get a very short-term drop, but that would only happen if there was a very big shift at an immediate point, and technology doesn't do that. So for example, we're living in an age now where there's an aging population. There is going to be ever more demand on social care. I don't mean physical care, I mean the social and mental care for the elderly. That's a market that is going to grow colossally. As much as manufacture of cars or picking corn or whatever might disappear, that's going to grow. And I think one of the bigger questions to ask, and this is tricky, is that if you imagine a closed economy, the wealth within the country is only going to go around in circles. So some tech companies might be earning a lot more money with their automation, but that money ultimately will need to be redistributed around, and it would probably find its way into either arts, or it might well be into innovation or R&D, or into care for the elderly. The problem you've actually got is that tech breaks down the international barriers, and there's been a lot around where companies are taxed. And the problem you've got somewhere like the UK is just the UK, is all over the world you get this issue. If the huge tech giants who are benefiting are located in particular territories, you actually suck huge amounts of money out of an economy. And that leaves the point where you might have so Italy's got this problem, a very hourglass-shaped demographic. So a lot of old people, not very many in the middle, and a lot of young people. And so at the moment, you haven't got very many earners supporting the people at the top or the education for the people at the bottom. And if you've got automation from elsewhere in the world sucking money out of their economy as people buy into tech, it's only going to get worse. So that could lead to some far worse problems than essentially automation doing the creating unemployment. Essentially, what you're doing there is unemployment due to lack of jobs because an economy is collapsing. That could lead to, in my view, a shortfall in employment, as you are seeing in Italy. But again, it's just a much bigger problem than simply going tech company, automation, loss of jobs.
James Davenport, do you agree with that it's the definition of tech
Well,
company
that's certainly one problem. But I think Dave's quite right. The problem is, if there is a real problem, it is that taxation is national, and that more and more with tech and with the invisibility of the imports exports, these businesses are international. Yeah. They choose where to locate due to ingenious accounting practices. They decide where their profits are based, and so on. Frankly, I think VAT is one of the most ingenious taxation methods devised in modern times. If you tax essentially on turnover like that rather than on profits, the turnover is more easily located. Not totally, you still have problems with that, but it is easier to locate where the activity is taking place. But quite how that's done in terms of taxation, I'm not a taxation lawyer. I do not know how to write those sort of things in detail. There are people who study it. What is quite clear, though, if you take out the words directly from that question, whether ultimately, of course, the rich or those who will benefit from the system ought to pay for the system, however it's done, but it's the word directly that really worries me, because that then gives you all sorts of questions of definitions, and then should therefore each company decide who is deserving? Do you have different nets of deserving depending on whether your company, say, whether your country has to be headquarters of Apple or Facebook or Google and so on? It's that word directly that really worries me.
Okay, do we have any?
Yeah, I just want to say that, innovation will lead to a loss of jobs in the now obsolete industry, but then there will be new jobs in the new industry. So, it can be a very localized problem, where there's a coal mine, people are out of work now, right? And you could have a president like the one in my country who thinks that we need to keep coal miners in business when clearly we should be moving on to new forms of energy production. The thing is with corporations is they're going to go where the cheapest labor is, which means they're going to go outside of the UK or the US or whatever country they're based in and get cheaper labor elsewhere. So then the people here are not having those jobs, right? And so then we create laws to keep the work here, but then, globalism, and it just becomes a huge mess. And I have a very, idealistic, probably simplistic view of how it all should work, probably socialist view of how it all should work. But I do think that companies do have a responsibility to be good. And just like citizens have a responsibility
by that,
to be
do you mean
good,
that companies have a
to
responsibility
take
to measure the impact of their innovation?
To ensure that where they are, the community that they're based in and the people who they're serving and those communities are not negatively impacted by what they're doing.
Okay.
How do you measure that? How do you quantify that? It's more than I can handle at the moment, but I do hope that people's, whoever is driving these sorts of decisions is motivated by their conscience as well as their pocketbook.
Do you have a way to measure that, Dave?
No. I think the problem is, let's say your coal mine is shutting down in South Wales or something, and you're losing 500 jobs, but you're moving to Chile and creating 5,000 jobs. So do you have a responsibility to look after the Welsh 500? Or is that trumped by the fact there are a new 5,000 in? I'm not sure you can put I don't think you can ask a company to basically be responsible for the community they're in right there and then to that level. I think that, unfortunately, legally, a company's duties are to its shareholders and its shareholders only. And literally, if you are a director of a company, your fiduciary duties are to the shareholders. You obviously have the legal duties of care to your employees and such like, but at a legal level, you have very few duties to the community in which you happen to be based. And then, again, you take that one level further and you look at tech companies and you go, well, Facebook touches everywhere. So what, is Facebook looking after us all now? If so, can I have my Facebook pension, please? I mean, I think that's a very dangerous path. I don't disagree with you in principle, by the way, that it would be lovely if things could be done in an extremely nice way. Unfortunately, what we're kind of locked in is capitalism, which generally means that it's a bit of a slippery slope, that really the only way of keeping going is to take the next step forward and the next step forward and the next step forward, because if you actually stop, the thing kind of crumbles slightly because you're not feeding into the system.
So if it's purely capitalist, but then it's also very short-sighted.
Yeah, well, absolutely. There are huge problems. There is no. I feel like if there was other things aside from capitalism have been tried out around the world, nothing has been proven yet to be better than. Certainly not on a large or long-term scale. So capitalism's got huge problems with it, and how you pair off capitalism with social responsibility. I think luckily one of the things we're getting to in parts of our society today is that consumers are actually more and more driven by the values of the company they're purchasing from. And that's a really good thing because, in the past, people haven't necessarily felt empowered enough to make decisions based purely on whether or not a company is like a green energy supplier or they're supporting. But these days, there is far more impetus to do that from a consumer's point of view, which I'm delighted by. But yeah, gosh, I think it's an exceptionally difficult problem. James has pretty much nailed it when he said there are people far cleverer than us who are employed who haven't come up with a solution to this. But because I don't know whether that's right, I don't know how you'd measure it. It's tricky.
It definitely has to be regulated by somebody who's not connected to the profit.
Which is, again, the same problem. If one country's government decides to take that step to do it, does that actually just decentralise the problem because the company moves to another country where the legislation isn't apparent and then post in?
Which is the problem?
Which is the problem.
Do we have any points from the floor, or should we move to the next question?
Just one question about where you define which is a tech company or not. Could you look at a company specifically and decide if some kind of automation has led to a loss of jobs, then the company owes its employees a certain amount of reprimands or something like that? Is that sort of a solution rather than just...
That's kind of what's known as redundancy. So, taking it back to its basic level, if I've got 30 people doing something on a work line and then I don't need them tomorrow, I have to make them redundant. And there are already laws around how much money I have to give to that person based on longevity of service, etc., in order for me to get rid of them from my business to bring in automation. So that kind of already exists. The thing you've got to be careful of is if you want to tax that, you're essentially putting a stifle on R&D and creativity because people don't want to do something different for fear that they're all of a sudden going to end up with a bill at the end of it.
I think the more difficult kind of employment is when, for example, to take a classic, very controversial case, Uber comes in and suddenly traditional taxi drivers become unemployed. Now, they were never employed by Uber in the first place. So in the legal sense, as I said, Uber owes them no duty of care. They become unemployed or underemployed as a result. And it's those knock-on effects, just as the people who invented motor cars did not owe a duty of care to the crossing sweepers. But I do have to wonder whether we aren't confusing local changes. This person is losing this job with macroscopic changes. Mm-hmm. And of course, let's not forget that unemployment in Britain is at certainly a recent low. Unemployment in the US is, I think, a 20-year low, and so on. So while it is conceivable that tech will destroy jobs, the evidence isn't there yet.
Yep.
And that tech is, as well as unemployment being at a low, the level of work security, the type of works that are there are in many cases not great. And if unemployment is, if things are so great in America, how come they've all voted for Trump? Trump, it's obviously a protest vote. It's. So I think what I think is interesting is this. The sort of people here that are at the cutting edge of technological progress, and it's the relationship between that tech industry and social change and political and social evolution, and that they're not kind of in sync, so if you look back at the kind of the Industrial Revolution, and I was lucky enough to go to Manchester a few weeks back and found the People's History Museum and got some some information about the kind of, you know, the sort of the changes from the people came to Manchester and they're working in the mills and they're working 16 hours a day and sleeping for 8 hours, and then there were kind of labour movements formed, and there was this kind of and the conversation that you know, some of the things that you guys are involved in on a tech level are kind of so complex and so advanced, and yet as a society we don't necessarily seem to be talking about. Someone mentioned this morning in the earlier debate about you want your work, you want to be inspired by work so it doesn't feel like you're going to work. And that's great, and you know, and what Dave's saying about working in creative industries, and you know, and you know, but at the same time, this whole kind of we've got this amazing tech, and we're sending probes into Jupiter, and all these incredible things that we're doing, and yet at the same time, people are like expected to be working in these rubbish jobs. And what are we here for? What is life about? And what is the relationship between?
That's a dangerous thing to.
Yeah. But, you know, what is the relationship?
Meaning of life is question 5.
Yeah, question 5. What is the meaning of? And how? Yeah, I agree. But keeping that on some kind of tangible level that fits within the debate, the evolution of this revolution in technology and what's happening, and this sort of like massive lack of revolution in terms of our political and social and economic thinking about how we restructure society and the distribution of the wealth.
I think there's a slight bias in the question as well. I'm conscious that we don't equate tech with bad. And part of Tech for Good Live is believe tech can be used for good. And automation AI can be used for great things. It could make, you remove administrative burden from nurses, more time with patients. You do it for teachers, more time with kids. I think talking about the cheap labour is interesting as well. I think the thing we do need to be careful of is that the people probably most susceptible to change are the people who are poorest and have the jobs which are most forgotten by society. That you could argue my lawyer is already a robot, but it's more likely cleaners are going to lose their jobs before lawyers are going to. Do you know what I mean? And
we always need cleaners.
We don't need.
But you know what I mean? We need to think about who actually is at most at risk of being removed, and what is in place actually to protect and care for those people, or retrain. I think that's kind of like a crucial part of it. That it may be easy to miss real changes that are happening as well.
And the question which I didn't bring up, I talked about unemployment being at a low, which is correct. There is therefore the related question of security of employment and so on, which is not quite the same thing. It's not measured in the same way. But it's in terms of quality of life, that's quite important. And one of the less obvious consequences of tech revolution has been a shift in manners of employment, in the sense it's now much easier to employ people on a part-time piecework basis because the parcels are self-tracking, so you can measure how much the parcel delivery person is doing, and so on and so forth. And this change in what I might call quality of employment rather than quantity of employment is something that's not stated in the question, but is actually probably at least as much of a problem.
You're saying the quality is going down, is that what
of some employment.
Yeah.
How much, I don't know. How does one measure it? It's not as easy to measure as are you in a job or not. It's a much harder thing to measure. But I think what we're seeing, if we are seeing a protest, is a protest against these more subtle shifts rather than straight unemployment. Because as I say, is statistically at a low. I think it's a case of quality of employment for many people, not all, and that's something that's much more difficult to address. Doesn't mean we shouldn't address it. Maybe it means that we need to think of the quality of employment we provide and say that, okay, we have self-tracking parcels so we can measure how much the parcel deliverer is doing in one sense, but just because someone's not sending parcel doesn't mean that suddenly they get no paycheck that day or something, wherever it is. So we need to think carefully about the quality of the employment versus the quantity.
But it's also, you know, when the gentrifying tech companies move in and suddenly everything becomes too expensive for the people who have lived there a long time, you know, then what? What do they do? Those are the people who need the basic income because their environment has shifted around them.
And for me, the concept of universal income is in isolation is exactly as Dave described. It's like people suddenly getting paid for doing nothing. You know, where's the motivation, incentive? So I think that the universal income concept needs to be framed within there will always be responsibility. You know, there's this responsibility, and universal income is great, but we need to shift the rather than becoming sort of like mini bots working in this economy in these crap jobs that are making rich people a lot richer. There's not, you know, that actually if you're engaging with education, you qualify for your universal income. If you're helping your neighbour cut their grass, you qualify for and that it's not kind of like a free handout, but it's managed, which is, you know, I'm sure you'll point out how complicated, and that's not as easy as it sounds, but the universal income is managed in a way that on a community level that you are contributing in a way that is beneficial to your personal well-being and that of the community.
There's an app idea right there. So we're going to have to move on. Got a question now about privacy from Zach Tonks.
Yes. So 6 months on from the introduction of GDPR and the flurry of emails that accompanied it, do the panel members respectively feel their data is safer?
James Hobbs.
Safer. Probably slightly, but GDPR has not solved all of the problems. I don't think it was probably intended to either. It was more of a step in, I think, the right direction. But if you look at this year alone, the number of data breaches, Facebook, Google+, Reddit, blah, 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 you know, the companies are still not taking adequate measures to secure our personal information. We're handing it to them, obviously, so in many ways we're kind of complicit in, you know, we're giving them access to things, and I think people now don't tend to, or I've certainly observed a trend for people to not really question the information they're handing over to people. I want that thing, therefore click accept. And that's one thing I have noticed since GDPR. A lot of websites are now just flashing up massive consent screens. There's a massive green sort of click here to just read the thing you want to read. And to make any meaningful changes, you have to, you know, the user experience of that is questionable.
Nice plugin that does all the no for you.
I'll download that. Yeah, no, that sounds good. But I don't think it's really enforceable. I don't think the Information Commissioner's Office is sufficiently scaled to deal with the volume of terrible data governance practices that are out there. I think what's more like, and I worry that, you know, really, really big companies, I think, is it 4% turnover is the fine?
Yeah.
Something like that. That's enough to frighten, you know, some of the bigger tech companies or any companies out there into action. And those are realistically going to be the ones that the ICO goes after if they're going to go after anyone. But they're going to be doing a risk versus reward kind of calculation here. I can guarantee you that a lot of them, as evidenced by the data breaches, are still not in a fit state.
I think historically the ICO has used a fraction of 1% of its upper limit of fines.
It's been toothless.
It doesn't use them.
Toothless. Yeah, I mean, this could be a chance for them to haul, you know, Facebook in front of whatever and really smash them with a, you know, multi-billion-dollar fine, which is what 4% would be. But, you know, if you think of the number of times you use the internet in particular and hand over information, it's staggering. And I'd be very, very surprised if every single party you're handing your data to is handling it in the best practice kind of safest way. Certainly in my experience, big companies aren't doing that.
Melinda, do you feel safer, I guess? And if I can ask about the US as well, I suppose. Somebody said to me earlier that Tim Cook has come out in support of bringing GDPR-style legislation to bear in the US, which I'm not sure is necessarily that likely. But do you think it's a good move? Do you think it is a step in the right direction?
Honestly, I don't know enough about this. All I know is that I constantly get these banners that say, like, do you want these cookies or not? And then I usually try to go and say, like, no, and then I read through all these things that make no sense. And I'm tech savvy. I know about this stuff. Like, and if I can't figure it out, like, what is some rural grandma thinking, right? You know, it makes no sense to anyone. And cookies, I don't really feel are really the issue. Because I think it is these data breaches, and so I don't know. I guess my answer is I don't understand it well enough to give you a good answer. Sorry.
Johnny, do you feel safer?
No one does. The first massive fine, if it ever happens, would be interesting to see what the response is. But yeah, the part of the reason why I don't feel safe, obviously the daily leaks, it feels now, the daily breaches, and also they don't care. Zuckerberg does not care about their business model is not connecting people, it's acquiring data and selling it. So why would they remotely care about my privacy? And I think that the other side is, whilst GDPR is great in the sense that I admire it if we do see an effect, maybe 6 months is a little bit too soon, is actually, has it kind of twisted the narrative and just pissed people off around having to deal with your inbox? Actually, like, do people feel this is a hassle on the consumer rather than on the organisations? The unbelievable mess of constant emails you're having to have, all of the various levels of consent, has it actually made people less sure of what data is? And I think the reason why I don't feel safer is the intent behind some of these organisations. They have historically skewed the way that consent works so that you don't know what you're consenting into. If you consent to location tracking on, I read something, you consent to location mapping on a map app, you say, yes, it's fine to track my location. And you think, of course it does. This thing helping me know where I park my car, I'm consenting because I want to know where to park my car. And those companies will say, your consent, you understand that we're actually going to tell that shop around the corner where you are, because they assume that everybody understands how consent works. But that's not how it is. People don't understand that you get Facebook and you get Twitter for free because you're buying it with data. And I think big tech assumes that consumers know that, and it's just not the case. And I think it helps you sleep a little bit better at night if you're one of those organisations. But a $5 billion fine would maybe make them a little more blurry in the morning. But I don't think it'll happen.
And you're right. At least one of the common council-used parking apps in the UK has been selling people's data to third parties, which is not really part of the consent. James Davenport, do you feel any safer, and do you think that actually GDPR then has sort of undermined our relationship
Has there
with...
been a massive kink in the graph? No. Is the graph changing slightly shape? Probably, but it's very early days to say yet. I mean, no business that I know of suddenly threw out all their code and did a from ground up re-implementation using proven verification for all database accesses simply because GDPR came in. That just didn't happen. But are people paying more attention to it? Yes. Are senior management paying more attention to questions like, A, how do we prevent data breaches? B, what do we do about them? Yes. Is that going to translate into a change in the long term? Who knows? I suspect it will, but it's gradually. However, and I say this as a university professor myself, education and the way we train programmers has a lot to answer for here. I went to a joint do between the information technologists and the engineers recently. And the engineers were horrified to learn that security was an option in degree courses. The aerospace engineers said no. I mean, safety is not an option in the aircraft designing course. It is there from day one compulsory. And the education process at all levels has to ask itself fundamentally, have we got the trade-off between functionality and security? In fact, there is no trade-off. Most courses are all about functionality. You get marked on your functionality, and maybe someone will spot a slight problem with security later on, or probably not. The trade-off in education is completely wrong. I believe that quite strongly, and has actually gotten worse. The shift. A lot of us now these days teach agile and so on, which sounds great, but it means that security tends to get deferred because you're being measured on functionality. Your customer measures you on functionality now, and I think the entire education development process needs to take some of the blame. I hope, I can't prove it, but more attention to the cost of data breaches and so on will make companies and ultimately educators think more seriously about the relative balance between security and functionality. But that sort of thing is a very long-term gradual trend. It's not a dint in the curve. Did I wake up feeling happier on the 26th of May? No.
Dave Kelly, you own a software engineering company, and did I gather earlier once a pupil of James Davenport's?
I was at university, but no.
Would greater training in early years data security have changed the way that you build the software that you build today?
I'm actually gonna not answer that question annoyingly, because I don't think data security clearly an exceptionally important issue, but that is the symptom, not the cause. The cause is essentially...
Has your approach to data security in the software that you build changed over the years? Have you become more mindful as an organisation?
Yes. So yes, you are, and I think James is quite right though to bring up at the end that expectation amongst clients is actually around delivery these days. So speed of delivery, agile is very much around speed of delivery to market, and that puts huge pressures on development houses to provide to that. My problem is that data in itself clearly isn't evil. And in the same way as a chainsaw is not inherently unsafe until it is misused, right? Data isn't unsafe until it's misused, and it is the misuse of data that makes us all unsafe. And the misuse of data isn't being perpetrated by developers. The misuse is unfortunately at a managerial or corporate level above. You know, there's someone making the decision to buy that data from that company, and sod what anyone thinks, we're going to stick them together and do something with it. That's where the problem actually lies. Does GDPR go some way towards tackling that is therefore for me the question. Now, I think that, again, James kind of picked it quite nicely, that there hasn't been an overnight change, but certainly in much larger organisations, managers are taking more note of it. GDPR is actually something that most people now at least be familiar with, and therefore would at least have to have had some level of education as to why they need to be aware of it, whether or not they've acted upon it. So that's only a good thing in terms of a step in the right direction. The problem is, slightly as we said earlier on, that GDPR is enacted in Europe, but my data doesn't necessarily just live in Europe, and frankly it might well be all off around the world, and so it only takes somebody from a country that isn't covered by GDPR. That's assuming everybody within GDPR was following it to the letter. I'm still not safer, because there's still plenty of people out there who can get their hands on data about me and misuse it.
And Melinda, do you think that there's a missed opportunity from a user experience perspective, kind of as James alluded to at the beginning of this question, that that actually we're so bombarded by pop-ups which don't really look like there is an either-or, and that we don't have time to understand.
Absolutely.
Actually, there's a user experience problem here.
Yeah, I think that's the most important thing is putting things into a message that people can understand, see why it's useful, understand why they're being told this, what they need to do about it, what the decision actually hinges upon, and that's the part that is completely missing. I end up working with a lot of next billion users, so people who are just coming onto the web right now, and people do not understand what a cookie is. They just don't even know. And to go and use that word, I don't even understand the relevance of that to what my data protection is, but they don't even know what it is in the first place. So making it really transparent, how to adjust your settings, why you might want to, at what point is it valuable to do so. Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's just deliberately being obfuscated. By the way, I just want to mention that there are a couple of, I can't think offhand of exactly the examples, but there are a few news sites from the US that I have attempted to look at that simply won't show in the UK because they haven't bothered.
Chicago Tribune is one, I think.
Yes,
Yeah.
and so they haven't dealt with the GDPR stuff, and so you just can't look at it here.
Well, they have dealt with it by just saying,
Right.
see you later.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a valid response in
I
a way.
think
But,
absolutely. I kind of applaud it.
There were agencies that popped up that sold that service. We,
Really?
Oh,
we
really?
can help you block that kind of.
So we've just
Yeah.
blocked ourselves as a continent.
Yeah.
That's their way of dealing with it. But you're saying that there are ones who totally didn't deal with it. They're not blocked. They didn't do anything. It's just
Yeah. I think for me, just the final point is that the biggest problem with this stuff is that I think we're all desensitized to data breaches. The companies who are being breached are desensitized to having them. I never get the sense that they're kind of, oh, sorry guys, 10 million people's user details have been leaked. There's never any consequences, so therefore there's never an incentive for anything to change. I do think GDPR, certainly I can speak from my day job, we've spent an enormous amount of time and money preparing for GDPR, so it's had a positive impact from a user's point of view for our customers, but they need to haul someone out and say they did something really terrible. We're going to find them, and
We're just waiting, presumably, for the first UK domiciled country to have a
be long
major breach.
because people don't engineer their software correctly. And to James's point, I completely agree education needs to shift, but we shouldn't overlook the fact that a large proportion of software engineers now have not got any formal education in software engineering.
But also user education. I mean, I think that there are different points. Like GDPR is one moment that people are aware of something, and so they have to do something right now. When they get, you know, their identity stolen, when they get hacked, whatever it is, like that's another moment. And that's like a really urgent moment when they're freaked out and don't know how to make decisions. And all of these are opportunities for UX designers to help people make the right decisions to protect whatever data they want.
Yeah. So we're going to have to move to the next question now. Ashka Nair, question from you.
Yeah, so according to the panel, what technologies will have a great impact on the world of work in the next 5 years? And a follow-up question would be, where do businesses need to invest in order to stay competitive?
James Davenport, what do you think is going to have the biggest impact in the next 5 years, and where would you invest if you were a businessman?
Two set of questions really here. So the answer to the first question is I don't know. It's almost certainly not been invented yet, or if it has been invented yet, it hasn't crossed my radar. A lot of the changes we've seen recently, for example, to take one example only, for example, the existence of Google Docs. The fact that you can now really share the creation of a document across multiple people who have no prior connection other than by being invited to do it as a completely decentralized thing, has transformed certain aspects, certainly of my work. The ability to sit down and write a research proposal with 5 people around the world in 24 hours rather than 5 weeks of emailing Word documents and working out what the hell got changed and so on and so forth. Yeah, that's transformed my particular world. And many people whose world has not transformed at all. So I'm slightly scared about there being a single invention that does that transformation. I'm fairly sure I haven't seen it yet. So following that, I think it's that sort of middle stage product, what I think of as productivity tools that are going through a transformation. I suspect that the transformation, not so much in work but in life, will come with the rollout of much better first pass medical diagnostics. So in particular, the example I know well is a dermatology app which is better at referring patients for biopsy than any known dermatologist. Now, the point about that is that it's better than any known dermatologist. I mean, dermatology is a very interesting subject because for many years NYU biopsied everyone who went to their hospital, whether or not were diagnosed positive, so they knew what the false negative rate was, which is something that's almost never collected. You could almost never collect your false negatives, but they did. So we actually know what the failure rate is in dermatology among these particular doctors.
You think that diagnostic tools in an area for development?
A great area because the dermatology app is much cheaper than a dermatologist. B, I don't need a dermatology appointment 3 weeks later, whenever it is, to get it. And C, it's much more calibrated than with dermatologists. Of course, this is only doing the diagnosis, I think we need a biopsy. It's not telling me I've got an illness, but a lot of medicine does that. A lot of medicine is actually the first pass that says we need to go deeper, or no, we don't.
Yeah.
And I think that the massive rollout and development, dermatology is the most advanced subject by a long way, it's the simplest one in many ways, the rollout of that sort of thing, and therefore the ability for doctors to spend less time on the first pass and more, make profession as a whole, and more on second and third pass care and cure, will be a massive change in life, not necessarily work, but life. And that's slowly beginning to happen. It's going to, again, like the hype over self-driving cars, it's going to be a gradual change rather than, oh my God, all my doctors suddenly become robots. That won't happen. But certain things, certain apps, and particularly in the developing world, where the penetration of mobile phones is far greater penetration of doctors, could be truly life-changing for those countries in particular. But my prediction is it's going to be that sort of thing rather than the narrow world of work. I haven't answered the investment question. I don't intend to. Thanks.
And Melinda, I know a lot of the big tech companies have made a big thing about voice and the changing user experience. And I've seen a first-hand demo of Duplex, which is quite astonishing. Mm-hmm. Do you think that that's a savvy investment for businesses now to change the way that they're communicating with their customers to be more voice ready?
I'm not personally sold on voice. It does have a lot of traction in some other countries, like in particular India, where there are so many languages spoken and a lot of people are illiterate, and so voice is a really handy way to input your words. But getting back to the original question of which technology, I mean, machine learning obviously is the thing that everybody's all hot for nowadays. I think ethical machine learning is going to be the key word that people are talking about more, because machine learning is only as good as the data you put into it. So making sure that it's representative data is where it's at, which will in turn help voice, because the more voices, the more accents, the more words these hear, the better they will understand and give you good results.
Dave, what sort of technologies are you recommending for your clients that they push forward with?
So I can tell you things when definitely not. It definitely isn't blockchain. Definitely not blockchain. That's stupid. Actually, I don't think that automation of vehicles is going to be big for business. I'm
you're
dubious
in the
about
logistics company.
voice. So the thing is, when I look at business, is that there's a big thing in there, and I actually think the things that are going to benefit business as a whole over the next 5 years are things that already exist. So businesses in general do not make enough use of data that already exists. Most businesses don't look at enough data that's coming from within their business, let alone the data that's available from outside their business. That's not necessarily new technology, but we might find that there are enhancements in that technology field to make it more accessible. I think that access for businesses to the gig economy, which have been enabled over the last few years by development technology, also is going to be really important over the next 5 years. But in terms of brand new technologies, yeah, do you know what? There is nothing that is that exciting on the market right now that means that we are recommending it unless there's a very special case for it. And that's not to say there isn't exciting stuff. But I mean, even when people use things like machine learning is a term that's so vastly misused. I mean, so little actual machine learning happens on websites which say they use machine learning. Big companies like Google, absolutely. But if you then filter that down to your everyday business, they're not using machine learning at all. Very, very little. And
James,
so I think there's teeny bits.
James Hobbs, is there anything exciting on the horizon?
I agree with Dave, actually, in terms of, that's it, that's the one time today. I've nearly run out of time for Discord morning. I'm not convinced by voice. I think there's only one big company that's doing it well, which is Google. Yeah. It's the only one that I've tried that actually seems to cope with what real humans speak like, instead of you saying, Alexa, do the thing, which is, I can see how it'd be useful for people who struggle with literacy, though. I think the point about data is a key one, because companies accumulate massive amounts of data, gets shoved into a data warehouse somewhere, never gets looked at, and certainly where I work, we're kind of springing up a sort of a data team to try and deal with that and try and learn, how our customers are using their products, how we can make them more convenient, etc. Hopefully in a non-creepy way, obviously. The other thing that I think, it's hard to tell if there's a revolution around the corner, but I think battery capacity is the limiting factor for a lot of stuff now. Yeah. And certainly there's been some investments in things like solid-state battery technology, and they haven't gone anywhere. So it's on public record that Dyson acquired a solid-state battery company, for example. But I feel like that is a limiting factor now. We've obviously got huge amounts of power in small form factors, but the bloody battery is always the problem. So, efficient, quick to recharge, environmentally friendly batteries somehow that don't rely on, children mining lithium in China or whatever they do. That can unlock all kinds of things. Electric cars, electric planes, blah, blah, blah. So,
Johnny, what do you see as the next revolution then?
I spend 80% of my time trying to stop people from realising I'm stupid, right? And 20% of the rest is biscuits. And this is being recorded, so I mean, in some ways I'm not going to answer because, we don't know. There's some things that excite me. Duplex is interesting and terrifying in equal measure. I'd rather answer where should they invest, where should tech invest, and it is in people and their staff. We're doing a piece of work at Tech for Good Live around how does tech handle mental health conditions in the workplace, and horrendously is the answer. Like, we're terrible at it. I've managed staff for a long time, and I'm taught how to coach. We're taught about agile. We're not taught how to deal with staff who have mental health conditions. And the way that we work is a nightmare in terms of, why are we not invested in that? I would hope in the future my wife can unlock her phone because the people who made it don't look like us. I would like a future where people of colour can use sinks that are automated and hand dryers that are automated because they're not just designed by people who have hands like me. We need to diverse teams. We need to be investing in the people. If tech is the future, that is itself at the moment is a terrifying prospect because we seem to take so many steps back before we take a step forward. So we need to invest in doing it right, and the way to do it right is to invest in people.
So on that point, we've got just a few minutes for our last question then, and just 30 seconds each, I'm afraid, from you guys. Oliver Lindbergh.
Can I trust anything I read online? Obviously, apart from the articles I write myself.
Melinda Clayman.
Yeah, that's a big question.
You've got 3.5 minutes. Well, between us. In fact.
Okay, verify everything, look at multiple sources, look at who wrote it, if they seem to be a verified kind of, legitimate sort of a thing. It's tough, but I think you can do it.
James, do you trust what you read online?
It's becoming increasingly impossible.
Yeah.
If you look at something like deep fakes, I don't know if you guys have encountered those. Practically photorealistic videos can be generated showing any of you with the right amount of data doing anything. I think veracity of information is going to become incredibly difficult. There needs to be a new way of establishing trust between a client and the information they're looking at, and the internet's not really geared up to provide that beyond SSL certificates. So I think I don't know. It's a really difficult question what you're reading without wanting to sound like a maniac.
James Davenport, do you trust what you read online?
If you mean, do I trust everything? No. Are there things I trust? Yes. What matters very much is provenance, and one looks very carefully. The problem with the digital world is that in the analogue world, it costs £1 million to buy a newspaper printing machine. Therefore, if you bought a newspaper, it came from someone with at least some cred. They weren't going to invest £1 million in order to produce this one newspaper that will give you once and walk away from it. That's not the case in the digital world. Anyone can write a website. And therefore, the question of provenance becomes harder. It's not impossible, but much harder. One has to look at where it came from, as you said, who wrote it, and so on. There are questions of authenticity and glyph squatting and all the other things that go on. But one has to check harder, and one has to be more careful. But it's a question of provenance that's become harder, not the medium. It's the provenance.
Can I just interject one thing?
Sure.
Rupert Murdoch. I mean, you're saying legitimacy.
He's not ours.
But no, I'm just saying, you're saying legitimacy, like they had to have enough money to get a printing press and stuff. So this guy has all the journals out there.
He's not printed that copy of the Sun in order to deceive me. He's made in order to deceive lots of us.
But you're giving him legitimacy just because he can afford a printing press for a bunch of different papers. And I don't know that his money and business acumen means that what he prints is true.
I didn't say I did either. So I know who it came from that enterprise, because no one else, someone else not going to spend £1 million to produce fake suns.
Okay, yes, it's legitimately the Sun. Okay.
Yes.
It is legit.
Johnny, how do you protect the more vulnerable in society then from the dubious veracity of the news that we read?
The glory days was when my mum would post an Onion article and think it was real. Like, oh my God, Daniel Radcliffe's actually part unicorn, Johnny. It's big business, misleading. It always has been, but it is at the literal touch of anyone's fingertip. do we throw more money into fact-checking is interesting, plugins people are building, but it's a cultural change in terms of how do we educate people to actually not trust what you see at a glance? How do we educate people that when you see this thing, check it, here's how you can check it, here's how you can find your answer, because hitting that retweet button is so easy, like it's so easy, and things are so, lies are so compelling, because I'm a wonderful liar. They're really, really compelling and easy to believe if it's good. So I think there's a cultural shift that we need around people seeking out truth, which won't happen, we're all doomed, we're all going to die.
I like your
Dave, in
optimism.
2 seconds, have you got anything to?
Healthy degree of skepticism.
Okay, cool. Well, look, thank you very much. We're kind of out of time. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you for the panel for attending and taking part.
Thank
cheers.
you.